Gonna proc it now. Gonna proc it now. By Jackson Aurelia. Jackson Aurelia. Gonna proc it now. Gonna proc it now. Proc it Jackson Aurelia. T-Force.
Welcome to the rework of the T-Force. Now we going hard cause we bumping at the beat source. It's a 3-course dinner of dudes bringing the news and stats, interviews and casts from the pro scene. So fresh and so clean, like you're leaning with Nami in the bot lane. Keep it hot like brand, practicing his dot game. Give it to you easy like you're Resi in a bot game. Imagine Draven at prime time. Now ulti like LeBlanc can copy that 4 times, but manlier. Knock it up like now fight planning a family-er. You gotta be tuned in like Sona on the ad wall. Get on the chat call. Can a podcast really be all that? Of course. How do 4 guys make a Triforce?
Hey guys, welcome to Trinity Force Podcast. My name is Adam Ponophobia Cogswell, and I'm your host for this lovely evening. As you can see, we have a giant packed house tonight, as this is episode 259. I'm going to first run down the people who are normally on the podcast, and I'm going to talk about the other folks that you see on the screen. So first and foremost, DeClaude,
hey guys,
Daze, Punch, and Chira are all
My name
here.
is Adam Ponophobia.
Hey guys.
And those guys are the normal podcast crew. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Next is Chris Alphenaar. Chris, I'll let him introduce himself. You guys already know him, but those who are tuning in for the very first time may want to find out who he is.
Hi guys, I am a master level psychologist. I work at a community mental health center doing therapy with people that are going through anxiety or depression or bipolar, and help them work through some of the problems that they're experiencing. And and I really like to play video games, and I'm really interested in people's behavior. That's why I went to psychology. And so Adam was nice enough to ask me to come on this pod with the guys and with Daze too, because of my background. So I'm super excited because I've been reading a lot of light stuff, and it's really, really interesting. So.
Well, hopefully you guys become best buddies by the end of this. So for the people that everyone else has been waiting for, I have Riot Lyte and Ghostcrawler here. First and foremost, Ghostcrawler, thank you for coming back.
Oh, anytime. I always enjoy it.
This is the third time that Ghostcrawler's been on. He came on You came on by yourself first, and you brought 2 game devs last time, and now you've brought Lyte for us. If he didn't lose it. So Lyte is also here.
I think Greg just disappeared. It's an honor to be here the first time.
So thank you so much for joining us. Lyte, for those of you out there that may not know who you are, do you mind explaining, your title, what you do at Riot, and all the good stuff?
Yeah, my name's Lyte, first name Jeff, and I'm actually one of the lead game designers on League of Legends, a game that many of us might know, actually. And I currently head up all the social systems and the player behavior projects in the game.
Beautiful. So that's perfect. That's why we brought Chris on here. We really wanted to talk about the player behavior stuff, because as some of you guys know, we've been talking about the player behavior aspect of League of Legends and how it impacts the players playing the game and how it impacts solo queue. So I'm actually going to put Chris in the hot seat right now and really have him start driving this conversation home, because I do have some other questions, but I want him to go ahead and take it.
All right. Well, I did read your it was, I think, a 4-part thing on LinkedIn, Jeff, that you had put up there about one of your experiences. Like, it was the step forward in challenging negative online behavior.
Yep.
And I was thinking maybe we could start with some of the content from that, because I thought it was really, really interesting. I thought that some of the things that you brought to light, like for instance, the amount of times of like toxic players, the frequency and the intensity of how often that they have those behaviors, in comparison to like a normal average player that may every once in a while. And I wasn't sure if maybe we could start there and kind of discuss some of the reasoning why you found that to be really interesting, and how you came across that. And
Yeah, so actually that all started back in my PhD days, actually. So back when I was doing my graduate school, we did research on like monkeys and kind of brain imaging, so on and so forth. And we learned a lot about what we call spike potentials back then. And when we looked at league players, what we realized was that there was several different kinds of league players. So there are the players that are, they'll go into the game and all they want to do is troll somebody else. But it turns out that, lucky for us, those are a very small percentage of players. We're talking less than 1%. And in fact, if you look at real life, the number of people that go into a situation and just want to wreck somebody else's experience or time, very few people in real life want to do that as well. So that's one kind of player. But another kind of player that we noticed in this analysis was the triggered player. So they're the kind of player where when they have a game, they're pretty neutral. But if somebody else in that game is kind of doing something negative or toxic, that will trigger a negative action from that player base. So we saw a lot of players like that. So one of the first questions that a lot of players asked us, and we still get this all the time, is, hey, why don't we punish the people that are kind of causing the issues and not the people that are reacting to the issues? But what they don't actually see is that, let's say there's a person, it's player A, and they're the ones that actually caused the first incident. They trigger something in player B, and he reacts. The problem is now player B is triggering something for player C, right? And that whole ripple effect ripples through an entire situation. So one player could actually be responsible for 1,000 different incidences in one particular day. And that's, we have this philosophy where we punish and give feedback to both the person that caused the incident and the reaction as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I also saw too that like there was a percentage that you had when you did those data points of those spikes. Like the percentage of people that are like the normal everyday player was like, if I read it right, 95% of what we experience is usually from like neutral or normal players. Is that true? Did I read that right or?
That's right. So about 95% of the toxicity you see in the game is from every that kind of like are either exposed to triggers, so some kind of action in the game is causing them to kind of go out of their normal behaviors. So normally, like in a normal situation in real life, those people are perfectly fine. They would never be the kind to kind of go passive aggro in the middle of a game. It's that trigger that causes them to do that.
That's really interesting. What I forgot to mention earlier, that something else that I do in terms of League is I'm a freelance writer for Weldon Green. He's one of the he's the site coach for Copenhagen Wolves, and he has a podcast, mindgames.gg. And so he gives me topics, and I write an article every month or so on that topic. And one of the ones that is going to be upcoming will be on rage. And one of the things that I've been thinking about in the article that I'm writing is kind of how the idea of displacement, how, if somebody has a bad day at work or a bad day at school, then maybe they don't feel safe taking out their emotions on somebody at school or at work or whatever. So I was thinking maybe they could do it in League. Maybe when they get on and they take that's what maybe triggers them, is that opportunity for that. Do you feel like that could be an idea that makes sense to you based upon the research you've seen, or what do you think about that concept?
We actually have a lot of data on that exact hypothesis.
Okay.
So what we see is, and I think in an earlier GDC talk, we talked about how it's not just about in-game context, so not about just the in-game triggers, it's also about real-life triggers, so out-of-game context. And we actually see a lot of times, say a person's having a really bad day at work or in their family, they're having an incident or an issue, or maybe somebody lost a loved one recently, and that's kind of the trigger from real life that caused them to take that rage into the game itself. So we see actually a large number of people, when they do get punished, their feedback back to us and the team is, hey, I'm really sorry this happened. I was going through a rough patch. It was so-and-so, this thing happened, and I'll never do that again, so on and so forth. And in those kind of situations, we have to be very careful, because it is rare, but we can't say that is an excuse to be that way, right? So we have to be careful to give complete a pass for those kinds of behaviors.
Now, if you don't mind, Chris, when you're looking over those players, and can you describe more to how the team behind that works, or what the team is looking at when those reports come in, what they are, do they have a guidelines that they're going over? How are they reaching the final conclusion if that person needs a chat restriction, that person needs to be banned, or what it needs to be? Because I'm sure there's lots of players out there that really like to know the behind the scenes process of how they got their chat restriction.
Yeah, so basically how the systems work today is every single time a player files a report or an honor, it basically labels that particular chat log in the game stats. And what we see is, after millions and millions of data, we can start predicting, hey, given this kind of language, how likely is that person to change their behaviors based on that one incident and the history before that incident. So our player support teams will get that kind of data of, hey, this is the severity of this particular incident, this is a historical record of that particular player, and this is the likelihood that we think this player could kind of change their ways based on those pieces of information. Then they apply the kind of human touch to it. So in the interactions back and forth with the player, they can almost immediately tell is this player actually wanting to change and they're kind of working with us together on this? Or are they just trying to argue that this never happened or these kind of behaviors are okay, so on and so forth? So the common example is a player will write in and they'll say, hey, I should be able to say homophobic slurs in the game because I say it in every other game and nothing happens. And the support team will be like, actually, that doesn't make it okay in this particular game. So those are more straightforward cases. In the cases where people have said like, hey, I had a family member pass away, I'm going through a really rough time right now, like I know that was inappropriate, but like what can you guys do to help me out? Those are the kinds of cases that we really invest a lot of human time on.
Okay, so you pretty much have an algorithm that identifies them first, and then you add the human touch.
And one of the things we do with the algorithm in particular, and this is kind of in collaboration with other companies as well, you never want the math or the algorithm to determine that decision, right? So we never say, hey, if you see this math say like a 0.9, for example, whatever that means, you can't make a decision based on that. So just like hospitals, actually, we do things like when a report is in, it's either a happy face or a sad face. Right, so it's kind of vague. You have to look at the evidence. You have to look at the chat logs. You have to look at the data to actually make a decision. And we'll even do things with our player support where even if it's a sad face, so probability is low, for example, we will purposely throw in catch cases in there where you still have to review the chat logs because it might be a perfectly okay case and vice versa. So if it's a happy face, there might still be cases we throw in there as test cases on purpose to force kind of player support teams to read through all that data.
Oh, okay. That's that's probably more than I don't want to say there's more than I was looking for, but that's exactly where the route I was looking to go down. Now you spoke to that you have like you have I would say proprietary systems in place for you said you get the I don't want to call it graph, but kind of like I envision. You ever use TurboTax where at the end it asks you your audit risk and it kind of shows it? Is that the same type of thing that we're envisioning these players going to look at? It's kind of like that audit risk type of thing that the player support specialists are receiving at the end, along with the chat logs and their reports.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting perception there that any kind of automated system is a bad system. But there's two key nuances there. So one, the system is actually completely driven by player input, right? It's every report, every audit that players do, not what Riot decides is good or bad. And that's actually a really key difference because the systems evolve over time by itself based on player definition. So one kind of funny example that we've given is in the last couple months, the word wrecked has become a very negative phrase in North America, in English in particular. So more and more way. But 6 months ago, that word did not exist in League of Legends at all. But the system is able to learn by itself that it learned that, oh, hey guys, you guys may want to watch out for this word now because it's starting to become a negative phrase in our ecosystem. And what we found is actually, credit card companies and kind of like Google and other these AAA companies have been doing these kinds of systems for a long time now. And people don't think about Google search as being more inaccurate or not accurate compared to humans. It's actually very, very good at what it does. And I think as we start to be more visible on the results of the system, players will start to believe that, oh, hey, most of the time it is actually pretty accurate. And it's more accurate than humans in many cases.
I'll let Chris, if you want to go ahead. I know I interrupted you in the middle of your talk to talk about the player behavior systems, but I figured I'd let you continue to go ahead with the the next piece of your of the previous discussion.
Okay, that sounds great. And yeah, anytime you need to, because that kind of stuff is really important. So I want to make sure that's touched on too. So I was wondering, like, do you think that the fact that like we're so anonymous on the internet, like there isn't that person in front of us, do you think that really impacts how people treat others in terms of player behavior?
Well, that's one of the kind of classic psych theories, right? It's all about the fact that we're this online. We don't think that's actually the major, most important factor today anymore.
Okay.
So there are classic studies showing that if we remove your identity, if we make you wear a costume or you wear a mask, you're more likely to do kind of devious acts. Yeah. And this goes way back, like 40 years ago in psychology. Mm-hmm. But what we're finding is when it comes to the internet, just as important as being anonymous is the fact that there are no consequences for anything. And if you look back to the old psychology studies, the key actually wasn't necessarily just identity. The key was it actually obvious to the person that something bad or some consequence could happen if you chose the wrong moral action? So these days, we think actually consequences might be even more important than your identity itself. Because if you look at like websites these days, for example, like news websites, we have to post comments with real names these days on almost every single news website. But any website you go to, there's still kind of like really toxic comments in the comment sections. So identity itself doesn't solve that particular problem.
Yeah, I saw that when you posted that, you said that you were really excited to see many of the people's responses about like, no, you should be banned because of of what you said.
That's right. That's right. And I think that's how we change culture.
Sorry. Your thoughts on the anonymity factor comparing to just the fact there's no consequences is pretty enlightening to me. I thought being anonymous had a much larger factor, but what you said makes a lot of sense. But on that topic of being anonymous, I was wondering your stance on voice chat, which has been brought up in the past, and I know you have opinions on that. Voice chat, if there was being implemented in a game like Dota, that kind of washes away some of the anonymous nature. So how would you feel that affects player behavior overall?
Yeah, we actually did a pretty extensive study on voice chat a while back, and there's some pretty compelling points that we have to design around if we ever do voice chat for League of Legends. So one thing is, it's very obvious that everybody loves voice chat with their friends. So let's just like put that aside. That's a great experience. It's good for everybody. What's interesting is games where there's voice chat and text-based chat. So some of the team is actually in voice, but some have opted out of voice. And when you look at those particular games, what happens is the text-based communication is over 126% more toxic. And I think that's the point that actually voice chatters forget. Because they're in voice chat, they remember the voice chat, and they remember voice chat being super positive, which is actually true most of the time. But they don't remember that the actual text becomes worse. Because what's happening in that game is you're immediately creating an us versus them situation, right? It's us in voice. You guys are not joining us in voice. You guys are the other side. You guys are either not cooperative enough. You guys aren't part of our in-group, so on and so forth. So it creates that kind of tension, that internal like kind of chaotic warfare between the two groups. So how do we solve that problem, I think, is our main issue before we consider something like voice chat, is the mixed communication problem. Because as far as I see in the vast majority of games, it is never a situation where everybody is in voice chat. And the majority of games, it's always some combination of those players.
Sure. I know that I wouldn't want to join voice chat personally, because I can't, well, I can't, and it sounds mean to say this, personally, I can't stand, some of the way some people speak. I don't want to listen to the way they speak. I don't want to listen to what they have to say. I want to be able to do my own thing. I'm a very independent player in that regard. But speaking to voice chat, if let's say you were to implement it in League of Legends down in the future, would you have some kind of control groups, or do you have any theories on the best way to implement those type of things based on how other games have done it in the past?
Well, I mean, I think some of the actual design choices we would make is, hey, if you're with your friends, for example, then it is completely opt-in, it's default to opt-in, so on and so forth. But any situation where it's like some combination of friends and strangers, we would have to figure out if we would allow that at all, right? So it is actually better if we say, hey, you and your friends are in voice chat. We don't even give you a way or an option to invite strangers into the chat. So there isn't a, hey, do you guys want to join? And they say no, and that upsets you. There's no more of that situation at all. And does that make it better? But even in that situation, we have to figure out, one of the interesting data points that we saw was from a university study that showed that just having a female voice in voice chat, so everything else being exactly the same, even the words that the people say are exactly the same, just having the female voice is 300% more harassments received. And that was concerning for us. Because we have a fair amount of female players in League of Legends today, especially in some of our southeastern territories, and that would be an immediate concern for some of them.
I could see that. I know we've had to deal with some of that in the past with players. We brought Days on for her knowledge, and sorry, Days, to pull you out like this, but we've definitely had to deal with some of that, and it seems to be a problem within video games and anonymity. But I guess we'll go ahead and move on here. I think Chris has a little bit more to talk about when it comes to part 2 of your article.
Yeah, so one of the things that you had mentioned in that second part too was like trying to find out or think about whether or not League could be a place where people could possibly deal or build healthy coping skills, because you had mentioned that you kind of had a thought to yourself, and I can't remember if this was in the second one or maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, but to where you thought to yourself, is it our responsibility to be able to give people the opportunity to learn how to effectively deal with these toxic behaviors? Because you were getting some responses back like, wow, thank you, I didn't realize that what my behavior was toxic. And do you feel like that league could be a place for that, or is that going to be too big of a thing to tackle?
Well, so we had months and months of actual meetings talking about that exact point, which is at our heart, we're always going to be gamers first and a game studio first. So we're always going to focus on making the best possible game, and that's our number one goal. But if we had the opportunity to kind of shape things a little bit in this area, would we ever spend time and resources doing so? And I think over time, what we've noticed is that, and I think this happened as writers grew up a little bit as well. So, the company's been around 7-8 years now, and a lot of writers are kind of building families for the first time, seeing their kids grow up, and they're seeing their kids kind of log onto online games for the first time, and they're seeing what they're exposed to, and they're asking the same questions now. Hey, if we're in a position to help out in this space, should we at all? Right? Do we want our kids growing up in a world where homophobia is actually the norm online? And I think a lot of the more senior leaders have said that, hey, we're actually going to try to make a difference here. So when it's a different company, when it's a different studio, whoever comes asking Riot for data or best practices, we're actually 100% all in these days. We'll openly share almost everything that we have in hopes that they will kind of take up the torch and also join us in this effort. Because we could never fix this kind of alone, right? And this is too big of a problem for that. Yeah. But if every company has a player behavior team, then maybe it's not that big of a problem after all.
Yeah.
Well, speaking to player behavior, and since Riot Games is pushing more toward you guys have really pioneered your esports to really help push into the future. So we have a lot of younger players who are out there, and they are now role models to the League of Legends community. And you just mentioned the word wrecked, and I can only imagine, I might be wrong here, please correct me if I am, but wrecked seems to be come from somebody online that is streaming and is saying the word all the time, or saying, sarcastically, and then it becomes a derogatory term. What steps is Riot taking with pro players to make sure that they are good role models rather than the role models who are like, I'm a cutie pie with his BD club?
Yeah, so the esports team has been doing this kind of media relations team, kind of a personal help team. And they've been working with pros more and more in the past year on exactly that. So like, what does social responsibility mean for a pro player? And what's interesting was that whole team started not because Riot wanted to do that. It was all because of people like I Will Dominate and Ocelot, actually. So they, a couple years back, came to Riot and said, hey, we're actually having a huge influence on how players are acting in the game, how players are acting in real life. And we're realizing that a lot of players are copying what we do, and we have a huge responsibility now. And they asked for help, actually. So Redbeard and Magus on the esports side were like, we need to spin up a team that is just focused on kind of player behavior on the pro side, because they're learning that they're on a huge megaphone now with this huge platform. But they never were taught what to do, right? They were never told, hey, if you guys do this, here's the ripple effects, here's how it snowballs. And now there's a whole team that's dedicated to just kind of helping pro players with that side of things.
I never even thought about that.
We've kind of talked about them in the past, because as a podcast, we've realized over the last couple of years that the way we speak and the way we speak, our mannerisms and whatnot, are having an effect on players. And we've had players write in and say the same and say to us, your positivity has increased our gameplay. Now, since, we're trying to make a bigger impact in League, how is the player behavior team specifically working with the pros? Are they seeing psychologists? Are they just going through specific training that Riot is coming up with? Are there details that you can share about what pro players are going through?
Yeah, so we just had to talk about this pretty recently, actually. So more and more teams are hiring sports psychologists. They're mainly dealing with kind of the mental stress of playing in a high-stakes environment, and kind of dealing with like fatigue and mental fatigue over time. And we were kind of wondering, should Riot, or should we actually work with the teams to hire kind of the sports psychologist on the other side? How do you deal with harassment? How do you deal when you have a bad performance and players are kind of like attacking you? How do you deal with that kind of behavior? So we don't have anything super formal in place today, but we're trying to figure out, do we need to do anything in that space, and would players welcome it? Is it something as simple as like, hey, here's a helpline where a Riot council will be able to help you deal with any kinds of issues that you face on the pro circuit? Is it as simple as that, or do we need to do even more than that? So not sure yet, but we're actually recently.
Okay.
That's cool. It's a good idea.
And I will say, like, before we get any further here, if you're having a problem with the connection, if you hang up and come back in, it'll fix it. I know a couple of these other guys on here are having a problem because of our previous issues, so that goes out for everybody else as well.
I will do that right now.
Okay, we're going to give this like a quick second. I know we've been having some problems, guys. If you want to hold on real quickly, we're going to get the Skype call. Consider this an intermission, if you will. Hey guys, sorry for that intermission. We're back. We've fixed all of the audio issues. Camera's probably not going to be a no-go just to make sure that you can hear us, but my name is Adaponophobia Cogswell once again, and I'm here with Chris Alphenaar and all the rest of the people from the Trinity Force podcast, and Greg, who's being very, very quiet this evening because we're really focusing on Lyte. I apologize, Greg.
I'm totally fine with it. I'm learning a lot.
We still love you, Greg.
Chris was just getting into a conversation about the Poro King, and I'll let him go ahead and ask that question in Lyte, and we'll move right back into the player discussion.
Yeah, so this last winter with the Legend of the Poro King, then you had written an article about how having some rewards for positive behavior, but having it done at a random spot rather than having it where somebody can have X amount, say 10, I think is what it was, positive influences, and then get some sort of reward for it. So it was going to be more randomized, and I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the basic concept that we're playing with, so billion clicks. The basic concept we're playing with is the idea of, hey, throughout the course of a year, there's going to be a couple of events that you can participate in. And each time you participate in the event, you get some kind of like badge or token to show off that you participated and you were positive during that time. And the rewards will vary greatly depending on the event. And I mentioned explicitly that because there's so many different kinds of players, from brand new League players who care a lot about IP and building their kind of first room pages and champion pools, to really veteran players where they have all the champions, they have 100,000 IP, and all they care about is maybe some unique summoner icons or skins. So we're going to try to actually, over the course of the year, hit on a bunch of those different types of drives for different kinds of players, basically. The next one that we're trying to aim for, actually, is this summer. We're actually building tech for these kinds of things as we speak, because a lot of stuff we want to try experimentally is just not doable today in any current system. So you guys may have seen the party reward system, for example, where you can play with friends now and get like huge IP bonuses. And we did a 300% bonus for pre-made 5s recently. So we saw really promising results there. So we're trying to think of more events where maybe all you have to do is play in a pre-made 5 to unlock some rewards, or maybe you have to identify somebody who is positive in your games in that particular week. And if you identify somebody positive, both of you get something cool. So we're kind of brainstorming those particular ideas for the next one.
Well, I've got two split questions here. One's going to be for Greg, and one's going to be for Jeff. Hopefully, I remember the one for Greg after I speak to Jeff. And let's hope I remember my question entirely. It's that a while ago, the player behavior team or the development team released the honor system. And I think that's exactly the name of it. And I remember seeing threads on Reddit where people were they were astounded. Like, everyone's being super awesome, but it's because they got a banner and everyone wanted to see what that banner did. So those threads and those people being really nice lasted for all of 2 months. It's been a year. It's probably been 2 years at this point, I think, since that came out. And
I think a year and a half.
Okay, year and a half. Time frame is, in League, it's pretty hard to follow.
Myself.
But I don't see anybody I don't use it anymore. I don't see anybody using it. What have you guys learned from that honor system? Are you thinking about revamping it? Are you still, what's going on with that? What did you guys take when you initially launched it to now? Yeah,
so that's a huge question, actually. What a lot of players don't know, and I think you guys might be surprised by this. So let me ask you guys a question. How many honors do you think are handed out per game relative to reports? Do you think there are more reports per game or more honors per game?
I would say way more reports.
Yeah, I would agree.
I would say more honors myself.
Oh, there we go. I may have gave away the hint there. So actually, an independent university did a research study about honors versus reports recently, and they found that there are 250% more honors handed out than reports per game.
Really?
And that completely astounded a lot of different groups at Riot as well. So we started looking into it. We were like, hey, well, if so many honors are being handed out, where are they being handed out? What is happening here? And then maybe to no surprise now, looking backwards, a lot of honors are being handed out in co-op versus bot modes all the time, every single game. And a lot are being handed out in Howling Abyss, ARAM, and a little bit in normals. But in ranked mode, for example, where most of Reddit players are, almost no honors at all. So it's complete bare desert in ranked mode.
Now, is that something you like attribute to potentially like Howling Abyss or like, you know, players versus bots being kind of a less serious game mode and
for fun modes?
Yeah, exactly. Like you go into it with kind of the preconceived notion that this is for fun, whereas people that are probably more likely to rage or take things a bit more seriously are doing those 5v5 modes.
Yeah, it's really hard for us to know, actually, looking at the data, because we don't know if one is causing the other behavior or whether it's just correlation.
Gotcha.
So look at like co-op versus bots mode. It is actually 500% better behavior than any other mode. And that's just ridiculous. Like, look at bot mode chat, it's just really, really positive all the time. And you see veteran players helping new players all the time. So maybe it is because of the kind of framing and expectations going into the mode, and therefore they're focused more on, hey, that was an awesome time, I'm going to give you a few honors. Or maybe it's, who knows what the correlation and cause actually might be there.
I think...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think part of it is in ranked, for example, maybe you're trying to grind LP, or you're upset because you lost LP, or okay, if you got LP, okay, great, I'm going to do another one while I have this momentum going. You don't take the time to click the little honors and think about it per person because you're trying to grind that LP. Whereas the other games, you're just relaxing.
I think motivation has a huge part of it. So imagine a crazy world where we said, hey, you have to have some number of honors to play ranked mode. And every game of ranked that you play, you have to expend one honor token that you've received in the past. So if we did something like that, I guarantee you they would use it more often. But does it actually promote the behavior that we want, right? So I think the key is overall, we found that on every server, actually, about 10 to 20% of players have the honor ribbon still. And this is years after the launch of the system. But all the players actually main one of the other modes, whether it's co-op or Howling Abyss and so on and so forth.
Got it.
So one of the things we want to do right off the bat is we want to change the kind of weights for each queue, right? So if a lot more honors are being handed out in co-op versus bots mode, then each honor should be worth a little bit less in co-op versus bots mode. And if you do get an honor in ranked mode, it should be worth a lot. So that should balance out the ribbons problem. And what we also have liked a lot in some prototypes is the idea of kind of MVP style systems. So imagine if at the end of a game, we ask you, hey, who is the MVP in terms of skill and in terms of behavior in the game? And it would be pretty cool if players could trade those for something that is actually very worthwhile, regardless of what kind of player you are. So those are the kinds of things that we've been kind of playing with internally. But as you guys probably know, we've been pretty tied up with a team builder ranked project, which is why we haven't been able to go back to honor anytime recently.
I like that MVP idea. I would strive for it in every game. So it also makes you want to play better.
Exactly. So there's both kind of dimensions that you can strive to be good at.
Well, I hate to put you guys in the spot here, and Greg might be able to chime in on this, but a lot of players, whenever we post about player behavior, a lot of them say the same thing, and that's, why is Riot taking the time to do player behavior and not working in a new client? Why is Riot not introducing replay systems? Why Riot, please, essentially. Is there a timeline? Is there anything that you can tell players, it's like, to feed them a little bit? What is Riot's view on the client compared to player behavior?
I mean, they're just different systems. Unfortunately, we can have different people working on them. It's not like, sometimes we have to make hard calls of we're going to work on one feature over another, but those are both huge cornerstones of the game, and we can make progress on both of them.
Okay, I figured Light would be able to jump in there, but I think that pretty much ends it all. And it's really the answer that I was looking for, because I would always assume that you have multiple teams working on the project at any point in time, so or different projects. So there's no reason that everything can't be being worked on at any one time. So
yeah, I mean, resources are not infinite, and sometimes we have to make a hard call about one feature over another. But those two features, the client and player behavior, are both so important that we work on them both.
Great. That's I think that actually moves out of that piece of the question. And again, I'm going to fall back on Chris here, because I'm going to let him. I keep interrupting him into he's got a whole spiel here, and I keep interrupting every piece of it because there's so many little neat points that are popping up. So Chris, do you have anything else to add to this?
Well, I think that what you had said earlier, Jeff, before was that, and I think maybe that was a little ways back, was about the idea that you said that psychologists, you had said to me that psychologists often look at just the positive behavior aspect of it, like getting rewarded for that, and fail to kind of look at some of how oftentimes getting like a consequence of some sort is also going to, I think this is what you were going to go to, is also going to be beneficial, which is that pretty much like what the chat restriction is designed for, is to allow people to have that reminder that if they do choose a poor behavior, then that's what's going to be the outcome?
Yeah, exactly. When we actually did beta testing on the chat restriction system, it was a full mute, right? Which is the most obvious design solution for if somebody's being verbally toxic. Just mute them and they can still play games as normal. But what we saw there was a couple different things. One, they couldn't chat at all. So they did start to do a little bit of kind of gameplay toxicity behaviors like intentional feeding, or they'll do really weird things like dance in front of towers, and people will be like, hey, like, what are you doing? And he can't respond. So it's just really frustrating. So we wanted to create an experience where, one, we basically forced this kind of moral choice on players, where, hey, if you want to use chat, you can use chat to help your team win the game. So talk strategy, talk map locations, so on and so forth. Or you can use chat to kind of be a dick. And it turns out that most players like winning more than they like being dicks, especially when they're in ranked mode. And I know a lot of players are kind of concerned that, hey, is 5 messages enough? If we start with 3, can we actually talk team strategy? What we actually did there was we recruited a couple, I think it was about 50 players on the PBE, and they're all positive players actually, or neutral. And we had them in all the different roles in the game. So jungle, top, the ADC, so on and so forth. And we had them actually play through chat restrictions. So dozens and dozens of games, and they recorded in a journal for us, hey, in this particular game, I felt like I was too restricted. Or in this particular game, I had just the right amount of messages, so on and so forth. And what we found was that 5 was a really good number, except for junglers. Junglers use chat a lot more than the other roles, so we're still trying to figure out, for chat restrictions anyways, how do we actually compensate junglers a little bit more? And in Team Builder, for example, in the future, if you do choose jungler, we could give you more chat lines, for example.
Sure.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually played in a game with somebody that had a chat restriction. I can't remember how long ago it was, but he's like, guys, I only have X amount, and this is one of them, and so I just want you to let you know that that's why I'm not talking, because I've been limited to, I can't remember how many it was. And he was actually like every single comment, I think, except for at the end of the game after we were winning, then he started to get a little loose. But for the most part, but that was more just with our team. It wasn't like toxic towards the other team. So it was really interesting how it seemed to shape his behavior.
Yeah, we actually get like thousands of requests every single day from players that want to opt into chat restrictions forever. They're like, leave my account. I never want to deal with like this not being on my account. And they said that they actually win more games with the feature on than off.
Huh. I actually
another resource like golden experience, Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, Greg, because I wouldn't want to opt into that, because I opt into it personally. Like, I try not to talk in a game, because I found that if I turn all chat off, for example, and I'm not sure how many players. Do you have any kind of statistics on what players have on and all on it, all chat and off it, or is that something you're able to track?
Yeah, of course. Actually, it's an interesting data point, because usually for opt-in programs, it's a really low conversion rate, right? So if you look at organ donation, for example, really, really low opt-in rates for those kinds of programs. But for all chat, we found very early on, almost immediately afterwards, 79% of players opted back in. So it was pretty huge opt-in conversion rates.
I know we've been preaching a lot recently that if you're having a problem in the game and you don't want to get chat restricted, to chat restrict yourself essentially by turning off all chat and then mute the players that might be getting on your nerves, because I do find myself playing better. Now, is there any kind of feature, will we see any feature in the future about being able to turn off chat completely but keep pings on, or do you find that's too toxic not to be able to chat in the least?
Right. We actually have this really cool graph internally where we measure toxicity and we measure the total gold value of your team. And as you see toxicity rise, you just see your gold value as a team just continue to plummet. Because then you're doing stuff like you're just screaming at other players instead of CSing. Or you're actually talking to other players and being toxic, and you're dying because of it, because you're standing still on the actual gameplay map. So really interesting graph, actually.
I wonder if you could incorporate that into post-game stats somehow, so you can take a look and see.
That'd be
hey,
so cool.
I would. This is why. Oh wow! And then maybe it might wake you up a little bit.
It's actually a really neat idea, and I think that's an extension of reform cards, basically, right? Like more feedback about how your negative behavior is impacting your actual game experience. And like I mentioned, players like winning more than anything else, so it might be actually very effective.
Now, I saw like an article the other day that basically broke down the amount of toxicity per like certain types of champions that people pick. But is there like, do you guys have a breakdown of like lanes or positions that people play that are potentially more toxic?
I don't think we've ever released this. So it's an interesting point for you. Not surprisingly, the most positive players, they main support.
Of course.
Makes sense.
Every single country. But what's interesting is that most toxic players tend to gravitate towards ADC.
Really?
Uh-oh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, Punch.
Yeah, looking at you, Punch.
What? He's a nice guy.
You are a nice guy.
To those players, one question that we asked, and we asked something in the range of 5,000 players these questions. We said, hey, how often do you think you carry the game for your team? And a neutral player, so the average player in League of Legends, will say something in the range of 25% of games, which is pretty close to kind of what you would expect given a 5-player match. A toxic player says they carry 49% of their games.
What about Riven and Trinity players?
Oh, I go there.
You don't have to answer like specifics, but do you guys have an actual breakdown of certain champions, like actual champions that people pick that they tend to be more toxic with?
Yeah, we do. And actually, one of the examples that we've talked about in the past was Evelyn, pre-stealth rework. Mm-hmm. So pre-stealth rework, Evelyn was pretty low win rate, pretty poorly balanced back then. And it was the only champion that basically stood out among every other champion. It received 300% more reports the instant you chose that champion. But what was interesting was players would then start using that champion as a kind of sign of trolling. So if I'm going to try to piss you off, I'm going to choose that particular champion. So it was a really interesting case in kind of League history, but we don't have any champions today that stand out to that level of magnitude.
I think that 49% of toxic players that believe that they carry the game is really amazing, because it kind of aligns exactly with what you were saying earlier, which is people like winning more than they look to just troll a game. So if toxic players think that I'm never the reason that we lose, like I'm always carrying these games, then they really don't have any indication that what they're doing might be the main cause of why they're losing so much.
Exactly.
So I love that idea, going back to kind of what Claude said and what we touched on a little bit of that report card, because it feels like if we can open up these ideas to the player base, to these toxic players, that the negative effect that they're having, that could just greatly improve their behavior.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a really interesting idea and easily extensible beyond the chat logs that we showed them today.
Well, and it sounds like too, like think about yourself when you try to think of maybe when you write a paper about like positive things about yourself, and you may sit there and be like, I don't know what to put down. But if somebody else shows you, then you're like, oh, that makes sense, because they know you and they could give you opportunity, like, you're kind, or you're, whatever it could be. And so those player behavior cards, it sounds like, are kind of producing that same type of effect. Like you're doing those in these issues in this setting, and then that person, sounds like what they're having is like the aha moment, like, oh, like I didn't realize those are the things that are causing me to have these reports.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, in the vast majority of cases, something like 75% these days, players will look at the reform cards and they will be completely shocked themselves. Like we've had players write these immense like Bibles and lettered letters that say like, "Hey, I would never do that in real life. I don't even remember saying those things." It's really surprising that when they see that feedback and they know it's their account, they realize that, hey, this is not okay.
That's got to be encouraging if it's actually sincere, and if you can tell if it's sincere.
Exactly.
Now,
I think
go ahead.
The one interesting thing about the sincerity thing is, and I've always talked to teams about this, is how do you tell that they're being sincere or not?
Right.
And in the cases that we think they're being very sincere is when they fully accept the punishment and they don't even try to appeal it. Right? So they're just apologizing for the sake of apologizing. They don't say like, "Hey, reduce my ban," or "Hey, give me my account back."
Right.
Just writing the apology.
Okay. Now,
way to identify.
Speaking again toward toxicity, what is the breakdown like between elos with toxicity? Is it true that higher elo players are more toxic, that they receive more bans, or is that number skewed a bit because there are more silver and bronze players?
Yeah. So we actually do this analysis every few months, actually, just to keep track of it. It's not what players would think. So it's not super toxic at the high elos. In fact, the higher you go, the more toxicity kind of disappears, and what happens is just competitive banter. So you get to a certain point where everybody knows everybody else, and that level of banter is kind of accepted among them, and that's okay. And obviously, racism, homophobia, stuff like that is never okay, regardless of elos. We actually see this really weird curve where toxicity kind of is the lowest in the kind of 1200 range, which is silver, low gold, so on and so forth. It increases a little bit at the platinum ranges and then continues sloping downwards in the diamond and masters ranges.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a really weird curve shape.
Are there any statistics based on where that player is in their plat rankings? Because I have noticed that some players in Platinum 5 kind of feel that they have given up because they've gone from Gold 1 to Platinum 5. They made their goal, and some people are just they feel like they've given up. Do you find any of that between the 5 rankings and the 1 rankings?
Yeah, we've done a couple of analyses in the past showing that Division 5 is where most of the negativity does happen, right? It's exactly like you say. Like they feel like it's hopeless. They probably dropped several games to get to that point. Because right now the system is tuned towards trends a lot. So if you get a streak of wins, you move up. If you get a streak of losses, you move down a lot in those cases. And so when you're in Division 5, you usually have recently had a streak of losses. So it's the whole concept of tilt, which is very evident. What we do find, which is kind of interesting though with tilt though, is let's say you look at players that have lost like 10 games in a row, and I ask you to predict, hey, what is the likelihood that you'll lose the next game? A lot of people would say, oh yeah, it's super high odds. But it turns out that the matchmaker handles that situation pretty well, and it stays 50-50 all the way up to streaks of 14. Which is kind of interesting because we didn't have to build anything special to actually do that in the matchmaker.
Now, you had mentioned, or we talked about like the different rankings. What about, let's go just a little bit farther beyond that. There's always the flaming, just back and forth kind of friendly banter between NA and EU. So do you have stats by chance about maybe which region is more toxic?
Kentucky.
Glad I'm not there. Just north of there.
I just got faced by Greg. That's great.
So we have never talked about kind of like relative rankings of toxicity between servers, but I will admit one thing. Europe has a unique problem in that they have multiple languages per game. So in some games, you literally have 5 or more languages being spoken, and every single incident that we detect multiple languages, it is a higher baseline in toxicity.
That makes sense. People get frustrated.
Well, I do. Chira, you had a question you were talking to me about earlier. Do you mind bringing that up right now?
Which one?
The line.
The what?
The line.
Oh, God. Is that the one I texted you? Give me a second. Somebody else say something. I'll find it. Hold on.
I've been kind of sitting on this when you talked about it earlier, Jeff. You were saying how it's kind of like a domino effect. It can all go down to one guy who started something. When I was in the Army, we did a lot of riot control over in Kosovo. and we would identify the instigators. And if once we take them out, usually it would quell the riot down. Hit it with a beanbag out of a 203 grenade launcher, and everyone else just kind of, it starts to disperse a little bit. So do you have a similar kind of punish? Well, hit them with a beanbag, but does it punish them or identify the instigator? Do you have any way to identify those instigators?
Yeah, that's actually what we're testing on the PBE right now. So we only talked about reform cards, but what the system's actually doing on PBE right now is it's trying to find the source, kind of the patient zeros of incidences. And it's trying to find it within 15 minutes of it occurring on the live platforms. So the question for us is, if this is successful and if we can find these people, what do we do? What's the intervention? Is it just a warning message? Is it we just hit them with a hard ban right off the bat? So I think we have to try a couple different things there, but that's what that system is trying to figure out in the background, basically.
That's cool.
Chira, did you find your text?
Yes, I did. All right. So, just based on the average player, and you already brought up earlier how, if somebody says something like racist or, like really mean like that, that's definitely toxic. But is there like a line in the sand that you guys draw on like where toxicity begins and ends, or is it way more, or like basically what necessarily in your mind is deemed toxic, and is there like a point of acceptability for like certain bad day cases?
Yeah, so this goes back to our number one philosophy, which is everything today is completely driven by players. So we don't draw any lines in the sand, actually. So one way that we see it in the data, for example, is as a company, we're not out to get offensive language, and competitive banter is a part of kind of professional sports, video games for as long as we've known. But what we look at is if, for example, let's say you take a case and there's a little bit of passive aggression, maybe a little bit pushing the line of competitive banter. What happens in the actual data is you see about 60% of players will say this is punishable, and 40% say this is actually okay. So what we say is anything that is kind of beyond that particular ratio, we're going to say is the line for that particular period of time. And because that's how we define it, over months, the line changes constantly. It's constantly fluid.
It's dynamic, yeah.
It's very different from server to server even. So like in Korea, for example, anytime you mention your mom, as an example, either jokingly, it is always past the line in Korea. But many of the other servers, they don't have that line even remotely close to offensive if you mention your mom. So that's the kind of example of everything is player driven, so it changes almost on a daily basis.
That is interesting, yeah, because then you have the cultural differences.
Give me 1 second, guys. I think people are trying to knock on this conference door.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I should have booked it for an extra half hour.
Oh, did you only book it for an hour?
Hey.
It's a popular room since all those couches.
It's just hard to know which ones are free.
That's all right.
I find
we
myself
can start wrapping it up a bit.
Yeah, I find myself having the white knight syndrome in chat. So I want to restrict myself from doing that, because someone starts ripping on someone else and I want to defend them, and then I'm losing CS and all that kind of stuff too. So
I was the toxic person this time and I kicked them out.
Good job.
Well done.
Well, I want to bring up. I had a couple questions that came from Reddit that I want to talk to you about. Lyte. There was actually a couple. Really good ones. No, it was the ones you sent me, Chira.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it word for word. So sorry if my inflection of my voice is a bit off, but I think it's a really good question. He asked, the Optimus experiment that you've previously talked about, where players are primed to be in a certain mindset by showing them loading screen tips, had promising results, or so you've said previously. However, the newest batch of loading screen tips that have been added to the game were from the control group of tips, the tips that don't talk about player behavior, but rather factoids about the game, like X champion is from Zon, Y champion is from Noxus, etc. Is there a reason the corrective tips dealing with player behavior actions that showed the greatest priming effect weren't used more? Is there a benefit to adding more control tips, or is it just there's no harm in adding those control tips?
Oh yeah, that's a great question actually. So we learned a couple different things from Optimus. So one, we could actually do a lot more different kinds of priming at different parts of the game to get similar effects. So one classic example is at the end of a game, instead of saying defeat, we could say blue team wins. Small things like that can actually change behaviors as well. Or when you actually die, for example, instead of showing like a death recap and a gray screen, we can change up the framing a little bit there so you're not as kind of angry. And we notice a lot of toxicity happens during the actual death timers. So there's different areas where we could actually expand priming a little bit more. But what actually happened with the most recent tips is we removed a bunch of control tips to add those particular ones, just because a couple different teams at Riot wanted to use the tip system to kind of expose our new lore, teach you a little bit more about our champions, so on and so forth. So we had to actually remove some of the older tips to add those new ones in, so the experiment is still intact.
Yeah, I like that question, and I like the idea of removing the defeat, because every time defeat comes up on my screen and she says it, and my wife hears it in the background, she goes, "Ha!" And that just puts me on tilt even more.
Wow.
I do that all the time as well.
She's so supportive.
She is.
What if it instead said something like blue team instead of blue team's defeated, or like blue team tried their best?
Yeah, you'll get them next time.
You got second place.
You got second place. Here's your trophy. Not everyone deserves a trophy. Okay, I'll move on to the next question here, since that seemed to answer that. The next question that came in, again, I'm going to read it word for word as it came in. For a while now, when someone dodges a Q, it just says that someone failed to select a champion regardless of the real reason for the Q dodge, and it no longer names the person who left. I've heard there was a player behavior reason for the change rather than the bug, because it was a bug, it could have been fixed. Because if it was a bug, it could have been fixed a long time ago. Are there actual player behavior benefits for not listing the reason a player dodges a Q, etc.?
That's an interesting one. So we've been working on the Team Builder draft feature, which actually tackles a lot of the issues with Q dodging today. And we hope that if it solves the problem significantly, this is simply a non-issue in the future. We have backup plans in case it's still an issue, where if you do Q dodge, you can actually tell us the reason why. So not the same as a report, but you can specify, hey, it was because of this particular player. So we might do that as a backup plan in the future. The main reason that you currently do not see a person leaving is because there was very little positive upside to knowing who dodged. There was potential downside, though. So imagine that person Q dodged. The first Q dodge penalty is about 5 minutes. And let's say just for some reason, he ended up in the exact same queue as you again. That's actually a really miserable experience. It doesn't happen often at all. We're talking less than 1% of re-queued experiences. But it was a lot more negative than it was worth, because seeing that name didn't do anything for any player in the game.
Right. So my follow-up question with the dodging, this is an open question to Greg or Jeff, in that you can, to the best of my knowledge, you can dodge every piece of your placement matches until you get what you deem as the best team, and to allow you to go 10-0 to get the highest ranking. Is there something that's going to be placed in the future to prevent something like that happening for somebody gaming the system?
Oh, that's actually not true at all.
And again, that's what I heard. I've read about this. I want to make sure. I guess let's debunk the myth.
If you do that, you will have a miserable ranking.
So even though you're placing you're doing your 10 placements, you have to do all 10 of them. It still takes into account that you have dodged some of your placements.
That's right. So the system will have figured out that it took you 20 games to do your 10 placement matches, and you are penalized as if you lost every single time you do that.
Aha, good.
Yeah, most players don't know that one, and that's one of those secret back-end systems. But yeah, please don't do that, players. That will hurt your ranking more than anything else.
That's actually really good news, because I've heard some pro players say the same thing, and I kind of raised an eyebrow to it because it didn't seem right, but there was no way to tell if it did or didn't.
That's right.
A question I had too was, we've been talking a lot about toxicity and raging and those sort of things, and I wasn't sure if player behavior was also working on maybe the other side of the coin, was people that maybe get anxious or worried about going into rank. Is there any type of things that you guys are putting into place to help people that are worried that they're not going to be able to live up to the expectations that they've placed upon themselves?
I think this is a perfect question for Greg, actually, because we just launched the Champion Mastery system, which we directly wanted to tackle some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. There aren't a lot of ways to progress in League outside of getting level 30 or then going into ranked, and we're hoping that things like Champion Mastery can help, take a little bit of the steam off of the pressure of ranked for someone who wants to kind of see their bar go up, to put it in pure designer speak, but is kind of at their correct elo or is kind of done for the season. They can jump into Champion Mastery. Now,
Champion Mastery coming out right now seems to be, from what I've seen, seems to be fairly easy to master your champion. Rumors of 15, 20 games, and that's a lot for a normal player. I probably only get 2 games. I probably get 4 games a week in right now because of a life schedule. Is there any plans in the future with the champion mastery to increase what it takes to master, to change? What are the evolution steps you're looking at to make champion mastery feel more like a reward rather than a grind?
I mean, there's a lot of things we're talking about. It's easy to add additional ranks. There could be, I don't want to oversell this, but there could be some type of light reward in the future. We don't want to, fundamentally the feature should not be about, I'm going to do something that I'm not enjoying in order to earn rewards. That's usually a bad sign for any game. We want the system itself to be fun.
How much cloud storage do you guys have? Because how cool would it be if part of the mastery system, you could check like a highlight system to where when you do an amazing play, the system identifies it and stores a little video clip of it that other players can watch on your profile screen.
I mean, that specifically would probably not be easy to do, but things along those lines are the kind of stuff we're talking about a lot right now. We really want to do more about celebrating, you as a player and kind of
enjoying the game. And
yeah. We don't make a big deal of like your summoner role-playing identity anymore, but it would still be cool if players had more of an identity aside from just their summoner icon and whatever name they pick for themselves.
Well, going back to the esports aspect of League of Legends and players in ranked, because I'm sure there's lots of players that play ranked 5s exclusively, especially like challenger teams. I'm sure that's pretty much all they play besides solo queue. Is there any difference or any weight put on teams of players rather than individual players when the statistics come in? Light.
So you mean like what kind of data do you see with teams versus kind of solo players?
Correct, because I'm sure again I'm assuming, but I'm assuming there's lots of players out there who almost exclusively play ranked teams or play with the same players or whatever it may be.
I think it's not surprising to everybody here that playing with friends is probably the best league experience you can have. And players who do like ranked teams, for example, we see a lot of, hey, on Fridays we're going to log in with the same group of 5 friends. We're going to play ranked teams all night long. Until Saturday morning, and we see a lot of teams do that kind of stuff, and they just have an absolute blast the entire time. Every single metric you can measure, whether it's reports, honors, the chat log toxicity, whether it's how likely they are to play again the following week, everything is just better in that situation. This is part of the reason why a lot of our features in 2015 are focused on how do you find and play with more friends. That's why we're doing stuff like the new kind of Facebook friend importer. We did the party rewards, kind of party boosting recently, so on and so forth. We're going to focus a lot of our team's efforts on just getting you to find more friends that you want to play with and make strangers more like playing with friends.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say playing with friends is like the ultimate solution for champion diversity as well, because you could tell your friends, hey, I'm going to try something really crazy this time, and they're probably going to be a lot more tolerant than, random dudes in ranked.
Where's Wrecker with his Swain jungle right now? We could talk to you about this for days.
Yeah, we know a lot of those people.
Yes, we have many friends who just, they sit down on a Friday night. I want to play Swain jungle. I want to play Poppy jungle. I want to play da-da-da-da-da. And hey, yeah, we're having fun. We're just playing and we're enjoying and we're not talking crap to each other in chat. We're talking in voice.
Well, and the other nice thing with we've built our own kind of little community here too. When we get to playing games, like if somebody, if people on the other team, you target ban and you talk smack, and it just adds a whole nother layer of kind of like enjoyment for everybody because everybody knows what's going on and they're all familiar anyway. So I like that you guys are doing a bit more like pushing forward for friends to enjoy this game together.
That was one of the most interesting survey data points that I saw recently, which is players love playing full 10-man games.
Big in-houses? 5 in-houses.
Companies love that as well, right? So Google, Facebook, they all have their internal League of Legends in-house games. So we're trying to figure out, how do we do that more often for the average player, right? Is there some kind of system? Do they need incentives? Does the average player even have 10 people online at the same time they could do this with?
Right.
So we're trying to figure that kind of thing out because we're finding that people love it when they can have it.
Good. I think I'm actually I'm running thin with the question front. Chris, do you have anything else to add to the conversation?
I think we covered most of what we had talked about earlier, so I'm good.
Beautiful. I'll leave it open-ended. I don't know. I guess I'll ask Greg. Greg, did you have anything that you specifically wanted to talk about tonight, or were you just kind of along for the ride?
Oh, I just kind of wanted to see where the conversation went, made sure there weren't any questions that, got over into my side of the building that you need help on.
Beautiful. Then I think that pretty much wraps it up. So, Lyte, I hate to, just kind of like push the boulder in front of the door here and not let anything go through, but I think we've really capped the player behavior discussion, and hopefully it answered a lot of players' questions, because as much as we're talking about toxicity, I see a lot of it in chat, just everyday chat. So I'm hoping all the work that you're doing and all the work that we're doing here on the podcast is really pushing players forward, and I've definitely seen it in game. So, there's an opportunity. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for all the hard work you're doing.
Yes.
Thank you guys.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The fact that you even have a player behavior division is just
awesome.
Yeah, it really is.
I just want to say we talk a lot about things that we do to try to improve toxicity, but it is worth keeping in mind that, there are a lot of great players out there as well. And I think sometimes we make such a big deal out of it. The message people get is, whoa, League is so toxic, when that's, the data says that's not the case.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure Greg has heard us talk about this on the podcast, since I know you listen when you can, and that's we get a lot of players who write in and say that they're stuck in yellow hell. All they do is every time they log on, they're seeing the most toxic people, and we try to tell people the same thing. You're the only thing you can control in that game, so are you sure you're not the toxic person in that game? And I wonder how many players out there that are listening today, listening to what Lyte's saying and calling, bullcrap. That's not correct. That this is, none of the statistics you have is right. Lyte, I guess, to end this with a question, do you have any words of advice, any final thoughts, anything you would tell players who maybe act like that, or players who are questioning your data points?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're exactly right. So you're the single player that is the common statistic in every single game. And if you're actually more skilled on average than the players that you're with, you will rise. Sometimes it'll take longer than others, but on average, we think players will get to their true kind of elo within about 150 games maximum. There's going to be like 1% of players that they will take a lot longer to do that, but that's just kind of how statistics go sometimes. But what I do say is there's a classic kind of psychology bias called the Dunning-Kruger bias. And it's basically, hey, on average, the more skilled you are, the more you understand how skilled you are compared to other people. So really skilled players, they will always reflect back and they'll be like, yeah, actually, I'm not that good yet, but I'm actually at the current right skill level, because they're at some tier, whether it's Challenger or Masters or even Diamond. The more unskilled you are, actually, the more you believe you should be where you're not. And it's one of the most common biases in psychology. And the average ranked player thinks they are 2 tiers above where they should be.
Interesting.
Every single country, every single skill bracket, except for the highest skill brackets. The highest skill brackets are the only ones who accurately predict where they should be.
Because when you win, it's skill, and when you lose, it's bullshit.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I will say that I have noticed some. I didn't realize how some mechanics vary between the ranks, and that the players who are writing in. My one fear with the champion mastery system, this is what I'm really reflecting on, is that we have a lot of players who write in and say, I go 20-0-10 every game, and I lose because of my other players. And I'm always afraid the players are going to be like, I'm master level LeBlanc, and I'm carrying the game as 20-0-15. They're going to use this as another level. They
use it as something else to measure their, dick with. Yeah. In comparison to other people who might not have that little internet point that they do.
And that's not what Champion Mastery is about, because we already have ranked to measure how good you are at the game.
Right.
Champion Mastery is much more about your affinity or your loyalty.
Your experience.
Yeah, I love LeBlanc. I don't personally love LeBlanc, but a LeBlanc player would have, really high Champion Mastery, and they could be like, look how much I love this champion.
Oops. Yes, I agree with you. I think that's something we're going to have to say for everybody who's on the podcast right now. We're going to make sure that, champion mastery is how much you love the champion. It's not a correlation of skill.
That's like wearing a t-shirt with your favorite champion on it.
Beautiful.
I like that you put it that way, because I didn't think that was how it worked. I thought it was how well you played on it.
Well, it's a mixture. I mean, if you win a lot of games, you advance quicker, but we didn't, we didn't want to make it Ranked Part 2, because part of the idea was to give people an alternative to Ranked.
It's just how much you play it. That's cool. I like that.
Beautiful. Then if nobody else has any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and move us out. Is everyone else okay?
Yep, good to go. I learned a lot today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very enlightening.
I thought we had a good grasp of the player behavior. I mean, we talked about it a lot, but I learned so much from tonight.
Yeah,
I really appreciate the input that you've given us.
Excellent. So, guys, thank you so much for joining the Trinity Force podcast and listening to Riot Lyte and Ghostcrawler. We're definitely going to try to have more people back on from Riot here in the months. I know Greg and I, we talk every couple months, got people on, so hopefully we can continue to speak, Greg, and try to... I really like Greg. I'd like in the next couple months to bring you back on with some of the game developers and talk about like a halfway point of League of Legends. Now that we're halfway
Talk about
through
Cinderhulk and Rek'Sai.
We want to talk about that so bad. You have no idea.
Well, no. What's funny, just to bring this up real quick, what I think. Okay, the last time you were on here, I have to bring this up, Greg. You said the quote out of you, and this is not an exact quote, was something like, "There are ways around movement and champions," and then Rek'Sai was released. Were you hinting at Rek'Sai during that podcast at all? I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome.
It clicked one day. I was like, Rek'Sai, there's another way to move around the map. God damn it.
And then Bard too, with the whole idea that like you maybe, and we're not there yet to be fair, but maybe you can play support without just sticking next to your carry in lane.
And before everybody starts going all Illuminati with conspiracy theories every time you're on the show from here on out, because I can't handle that.
Now they're going to comb through this episode.
That's great. Well, guys, thank you so much, both of you, Jeff and Greg, for joining this show. That is episode number 259 of the podcast. Chris, as well, thank you so much for really leading the discussion. I definitely don't want to lead you out of that, so... that's episode number 259 of the Trinity Force podcast. You guys can find us at trinityforcenetwork.com or trinityforcepodcast.com. We'll be back on Wednesday live at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We'll be talking, I don't know what we're talking about, League of Legends. That's what we do here on the Trinity Force podcast. So
fall back.
Yeah. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you all next week.
Bye, guys.
See you guys.
Woo!
Song goes out to all you beta players and everyone who was playing way back when, and everyone who's still playing but doesn't rage. Here we go. I used to play League back in the day when you could grab a kid with blitz, flash away, and it would move him like half the lane. Finish the kill quick and go to Drake. Oh wait, pull him through the wall and you can kill him at your own pace. I'd buy some fire capes and stack them 5 deep. I didn't even have to spend a win when I was farming creeps. And all the players scream, nerf Garen so obscene. 4% reduction shield, but one skill point is too OP. I'd play the Cryo Phoenix mid and farm with Glacial Storm. I couldn't die cause if they egg me, I'd just teleport. And then I played Twisted Fate until it got late. Split push, and when they came to gank, Sonya's ringing gate. Cleaver Bear until he fell into pieces. Cause back then, Dr. Mother Solo Baron as he pleases. Even if that failure still couldn't stop me. Take him out the pit with a heroic charge from Poppy. I like to play League when it was brand new. No pressure to perform. The game was full of chill dudes. No rank modes. No reason to rage out. Try what you like. No meta game devout. It's still cool, but it's getting too serious. Furious kids looking for pro level experience. I'm not saying we should troll or quit, don't jump the gun. I guess my point is just that we should try to keep it fun. Picked up releasing and crushed teams all alone. Be a man playing in my head while landing killing blows. Activate you moves and there he goes unstoppable. But if you pick XZ nowadays, people say you're a troll. I was so pro, spirit of an animal. Beast around the map with help, the mana that was always full. Innovating, locket rush, irrational, effects maximal. You had to focus the tank, it's so impractical. Hammer at 6 turrets, and you could stack them deep. Block the creeps and make a giant wave while your opponents weep. Release the minions like a flash flood, alpha blood. Combo with 5 promotes, all they can do is shrug. I roll with AD mids, thorns instead of boots. Extra damage for the lane, and you could buy some pots too. No one forced the meta game, you wanna try it, strat is cool. No pros to emulate, no bullshit arbitrary rules. I like to play League when it was brand new. No pressure to perform, the game was full of chill dudes. No rank modes, no reason to rage out. Try what you like. No metagame devout. It's still cool, but it's getting too serious. Furious kids looking for pro level experience. I'm not saying we should troll or quit, don't jump the gun. I guess my point is just that we should try to keep it fun.
Thanks for listening to the Trinity Force Podcast, part of the Trinity Force Network. If you liked our advice and would like to hear your question read on air, you can reach us at feedback@trinityforcepodcast.com. You can also check out all of our other awesome products that we release on the weekly. For your first stop is at trinityforcepodcast.com, where you'll find links to the LCS Rundown and Oz LOL podcast. Next, head over to youtube.com/tforce podcast to find weekly VODs of all our shows and battle arenas. And as you may have guessed it, we're also available on social media, facebook.com and twitter.com/tforce podcast to follow us there. Finally, you can catch us live every Monday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/tforce podcast. For more information on our schedules, click on the bar on the top of trinityforcepodcast.com. Thanks again for listening, and join us each week for a double dose of your favorite League of Legends discussion.